In this lesson, we will discuss the concept of slope, which is also known as the gradient. So basically, slope can be defined by a mathematical formula which is given by rise over run. Now, how do I explain this concept? Like for instance, if I take a line, so the slope of this line is dependent upon two factors. The first factor is the run, which is dependent upon the x component, the horizontal component. And then we have a certain rise, which is dependent upon the y components or the vertical component. So we can see that this is the run and this is the rise. This point right here is considered as x1, and the change in the horizontal length is basically x2. Similarly, this point right here is represented as y1, and the change in the vertical height is basically known as y2. So this is the reason why we basically write this run. The change in this run is basically denoted by x2 minus x1. This is the change in the horizontal. And similarly, here, this is the change in the vertical, which is represented by the final y minus the initial y. And this slope is represented by m. So this is the mathematical formula which we usually use to find the slope of any line. Now, let's consider 2 points. Like for instance, I have 1 comma 3 and I have 4 comma 5, and I need to find the slope by using these 2 points. So first things first, that you'll take this as my x1, this will take you'll take as y1, this will be x2, and this will be y2. Now you just have to simply implement the formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I just need to now replace the respective values. So the value of y2 is basically 5 minus the value of y1 is basically 3 over the value of x2 is 4 minus the value of x1 is just 1. So if I just simplify this, so I'll get 2 over 3. So this is the slope of the line having these 2 points. Now, just to give you a general concept, and this is always the case. Like for instance, if I have a line which is like for instance in this direction, like it's moving upward like this. So always remember one thing, that it will always have a positive slope. Similarly, like for instance, if I have a line which is moving in the opposite direction like this, like it's moving in the opposite direction, it will always have a slope which will be negative. So this is some general way to basically describe the difference between the positive slope and the negative slope. So I can see that this is increasing. So this is the run is increasing, the rise, it's also increasing. So we have a positive slope. But here I can see the run is towards the positive side, but obviously I can see that it's going downward, it's going downwards. So it will be negative. Anyways, so the thing is, this is a general way to basically show that the slope will be positive if we have a line like this. The slope will be negative if we have a line like this. Moreover, there are a few more concepts to explain in the concept of slope. Like for instance, if I have a line which is horizontal, perfectly horizontal, so I can see that there is a certain run, but I can see that there is no rise. There is zero rise. There is no rise. So there is no rising value. So if I apply the formula, m is equal to rise over run, So that means if I see that there is no rise over a certain run, ultimately the value will be equal to 0. And this is the reason why horizontal lines have zero slope. We have one more case, like for instance, if I have a perfectly vertical line, so I can see that there is a certain rise, but there is like no run, there is zero run. So then again, if I apply the formula of slope, which is m is equal to rise over run, so the value will be rise is basically there is a certain rise, but there is zero run. And this is the reason it will be undefined. And that's the reason we basically say that a vertical line has infinite slope. Moreover, we can basically say that this concept is a contextual concept of basically slope. But when we come to the mathematical, a bit more mathematical concept, so we basically use the formula of y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So this is a more commonly followed formula in order to find the numerical value of the slope. Moreover, we can see a few more examples. Like for instance, if I consider two more points, let's consider some negative values. So negative 3 comma negative 5 and maybe 2 comma negative 8. So first things first, we'll consider this as x1, y1, and I'll consider this as x2 and y2. Now, you just have to apply the formula. So we see y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So m is equal to the value of y2 is negative 8 minus the value of y1 is negative 5. But when you put a negative 5 over here, it will be positive 5 over x2. The value of x2 is basically 2 minus the value of x1 is negative 3. When you put a negative 3 over here, so it will be positive. So m will be equal to minus 8 plus 5 will basically give you negative 3 over 2 plus 3 is basically 5. So the slope is basically negative 3 over 5. So let's consider one more example in which it's clearly mentioned that you have to find this value of g if the slope between these 2 points is 3. So that means in this question, I am basically concerned about the value of g. That means I have to find this value of g. Given that I have these 2 points, so this is x1, this is y1, this is x2, and this is y2. And this value right here is the value of m, or you can simply say that this is my value of the slope. So you'll just apply the formula m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the value of m is basically 3 is equal to the value of y2 is negative 3 minus the value of y1 is g over the value of x2 is 2 minus the value of x1 is 4. Now we just have to simplify this. So 2 minus 4 is negative 2 when taken on the left hand side. So it will be 3 times negative 2 is equal to minus 3 minus g. 3 times negative 2 will give you negative 6. This negative 3 when goes on the right hand side will be left hand side, sorry. So it will be negative 6 plus 3 is equal to negative g, and from here I'll get negative 3 is equal to negative g, and finally the value of g will be equal to positive 3. So this was one more example of basically slope, but in this question we were supposed to find the value of g when we already had the value of the slope. So there's one more concept in the topic of slope, which is that whenever we have a line and we have some collinear points, Now, what do I mean by the concept of collinear points? So collinear points are those points which lie on the same straight line. So I have these 4 points and these 4 points on the same straight line. So these points are basically known as collinear points. So these are the collinear points. Like for instance, if x, if I have a point somewhere here or I have a point somewhere here, so these 2 points are not collinear because they are not on the same straight line. So you always have to remember one thing, that whenever we have collinear points, let me label them for you. So I have A, B, C, and D. So if I find the slope from A to B, let's consider this as slope of AB. And if I find the slope from B to C, let's label this as BC. And if I find the slope from C to D, so let's label it as slope CD. All these three slopes will be equal to each other. So what do I mean by that? It means slope of AB will be equal to the slope of BC will be equal to the slope of CD. All these three slopes will be equal to each other. Even if you find the slope of A and D directly, if you use this point and this point to find the slope, still the slope will be same. If you find the slope of B, if you find the slope of BD, if you use this point and this point, so the slope of MBD will also be equal. So the main concept behind this is that whenever we use any of the points on the same straight line, the slope will always be the same. Basically, there is one more concept in slope and gradient, and that is the slope of parallel lines. Likewise, we have one more thing, which is the slope of perpendicular lines. So, slope of perpendicular lines. So, we see, like for instance, if we have the xy plane, if we have a certain xy coordinate plane, so this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and I have two lines. This is the first line, and this is the second line. So this is my line number 1. This is line number 2. So obviously line number 1 will have a certain slope m1 and line number 2 will have a certain slope m2. So in case of parallel, like if the lines are parallel to each other, that means they'll never meet each other at any point. They'll just keep moving forward with a certain distance from each other, and this distance always remains the same. So this distance never changes. This distance always remains the same. And that's the reason these two lines are always at a certain distance and they never meet each other. So if this is the case and lines are parallel, so m1 will be equal to m2. In other words, the slope of line 1 will be equal to the slope of line 2. Now, if we move towards another concept of perpendicular lines, like for instance, if I consider the xy coordinate plane, so this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. And for instance, if I have two lines, like this is the first line and this is the second line, and these two lines are at an angle of 90 degrees. This is my line number 1. This is my line number 2. So what will happen over here is line number 1 will have a slope m1, line number 2 will have a slope m2. In this case scenario, the product of the two slopes will be equal to -1. Or maybe we can say that m1 will be equal to 1 over m2. Or we can even say that m2 will be equal to -1 over m1. So sometimes we can even say this as M1 and M2 are the negative reciprocals of each other. Or just to make things really simple, you can just say that M1 times M2 is equal to negative 1. Or you can say the product of the two slopes will always be equal to minus 1. So this was all for the concept of slope and gradient for coordinate geometry. Hopefully in the next lesson, we'll move on towards the equation of line.